By the time the truck stalled beneath the violet sky, Luther's secret was rattling in the glove compartment, and Bale's past pressed against his ribs like a caged bird. The road ahead flickered with heat, with promises, with danger. They weren't running yet, but something had started to chase them down. It began in Accra, in the baked light of afternoon, with lizards doing push-ups on a cracked wall and the air humming with radios and exhaust. Bale stood outside the arrivals hall with a soft-sided suitcase and a small tin box packed into his backpack, the kind of tin that once held biscuits and now held something no sweeter than dust and memory. 60 had arrived like a sly guest, making itself at home in his knees and in the way strangers forgot him as soon as they looked. Yet when he saw Luther walking toward him, tall, sun-browned, a blue shirt open at the throat, something in Bale remembered how to be seen. "You're Bale?" Luther's voice came rich and low, like the first note of a song you want to follow. "And you're my driver," Bale said, then felt too sharp, too transactional. "I mean, thank you. Luther, right?" "Luther," he confirmed, and smiled. It was a careful smile, like he wore it rarely, or saved it. "Roads long to the north. We should beat the traffic." The Land Cruiser was older than either of I. Them should trust, patched with a mismatched door and new tires that promised more than the engine could deliver. Luther strapped Bale's bag in the back, then held the passenger door as if opening a secret. Bale took the gesture like a surprising gift, slid into the seat, and set his hand on the scuffed dashboard. The glove compartment thudded closed, and something inside pinged against plastic. "Everything all right there?" Bale asked lightly. "Always," Luther said, but his gaze cut left, quick, to the glove box before he turned the key. The city gave way to roadside stalls, a forest of umbrellas blooming over pyramids of mangoes and plantains, women balancing, kingdoms on their heads, little boys in Barcelona jerseys racing the shadows of trotros. Bale watched it all with greedy eyes. He had come for the north, for the dry open that had called to him for 3 decades, and for the small town where he had once promised a boy he'd return. He had not. That boy had grown into a man without him, and then into the earth. The tin. In Bale's bag held what the family had sent, what they wanted Bale to carry home to a place called Keat. "First time?" Luther asked, as the road coiled past scrub and palm. "First time back," Bale said, and felt how the words split the page of his life into before and after. "I was 27. I thought I had time." Luther didn't say you still do. He let the engine's song be the answer. Let the miles shoulder their silence. Bale studied the man at the wheel. Broad hands, quiet jaw, the small scar along his cheek like a stitch from another story. There was a gravity to him, not heaviness exactly, but a draw, like the way the sea pulls you even when you think you're staying on shore. "What about you?" Bale ventured. "You from the north?" "Volta," Luther said. "But I live in the city now. I drive, I fix things, sometimes music in the evenings." "Music," Bale said softly, as if the word itself were a door. "What do you play?" "Guitar. My father taught me 3 chords. I found the rest." Bale laughed, catching a glance of Luther's quick returning smile. That glance paired with the heat in the cab, and the air became full of a kind of static. That wasn't only the road. Bale turned his palm up on his thigh, let it rest there, open to nothing and to everything, and the nothing filled with a memory. Hands on his shoulders a lifetime ago. Young laughter. A promise murmured in you and English, 2 boys having the nerve to believe a small corner of the world was theirs. They hit the first checkpoint just after midday. Men in uniforms waved batons like wands. Luther slowed, rolled his window down, lifted his chin with familiar confidence. "Good afternoon," he said. The officer looked into the cab, took in Bale, took in the hands of the clock ticking 60. At his temples, took in the driver who didn't flinch or fawn. Papers were inspected, handed back with a bored flick. "Drive safe," the officer said, and they were through. Bale exhaled. "Do they always look at you like that?" "Sometimes like that, sometimes worse." Luther's knuckles flexed on the wheel. But we keep moving. They ate by the road at a shack that smelled like history and wood smoke. Luther ordered wakey for both, rice and beans turning Bale's hunger into something patient, the spicy stew making his scalp sweat. A girl no taller than the table offered sachets of water, and when Bale fumbled with his fingers, clumsy with heat and nerves, Luther took the packet, bit it, and handed it to him with a twinned look. Here. And also, I see you. He wanted to ask. Everything. He asked instead, why drive someone like me so far, Luther? It's not glamorous. It's not. Sometimes people need to go where they're afraid to go, Luther said. I can help with that. Bale looked down at his food. I'm afraid, he said, and didn't know if he meant the journey or what waited at the end. When they returned to the truck, a cloud had covered the sun, thinning it. The world felt closer, humid with something unnamed. Luther checked the straps on the cargo, checked the spare tire, checked the glove box. No, he only touched the latch and then moved away as if from a sleeping dog. Back on the road, the land shifted, palms giving way to low thorn and expanse. The heat dizzied. Bale folded and unfolded the map, though Luther had the way in his body. The tin in his bag seemed heavier every kilometer. He pictured Keith's dusty square, the house with the blue door, the mother with her long, tired hands. He had written to say he would come. Her reply had been careful. You are welcome. He imagined the fine script like fingers that might tremble. Tell me about him, Luther said, not looking over, not pushing. Bale turned to the window, trusting the glass to hold him up. Kofi, he said, and the name tasted like a fruit he hadn't eaten in years, still sweet, still a little dangerous. He was 23. I was too proud to be scared, and then I was too scared to be brave. He waited anyway. And now you're going, Luther said. Bale nodded. Now I'm going. A goat wandered into the road out of nowhere, foolish and glorious, its ribcage like a musical instrument. Luther cursed softly in you and swerved. The glove box popped its latch with a ridiculous cheer and sprang open, spilling a battered cassette, a knotted rosary, and an old envelope edged in. Dust. Bale's name was there, his name in a handwriting he knew. The truck straightened. The goat trotted on, smug with survival. Luther's breath sawed once, twice. Bale reached, stopped his hand halfway, felt the air between them thicken like sap. That, Bale said, voice nearly gone. Luther! Why is that here? Luther pulled to the shoulder, cut the engine. The silence came down like a curtain, and beyond it the low chorus of insects and a far-off radio, someone singing about what you can't outrun. Luther kept his hands on the wheel, then let them fall. He turned, finally, to meet Bale's eyes. I was going to tell you, he said. When? When I knew if you still wanted to go. Bale picked up the envelope. It felt like time itself, thin and unforgiving. The edges were softened by fingers, by hope. The postmark was the year 1988. He swallowed, his throat a brittle reed. Where? Did you get this? My aunt, Luther said. She worked at a clinic then. She kept letters no one came to claim because she couldn't throw away people's words. When she died, I found a box. I saw your name. I asked around. A friend at the embassy found you. Bale pressed the envelope to his chest, to his unraveling heart. And you didn't write me in your own name. I thought you wouldn't. Come for me, Luther said, and the faintest smile pulled at his mouth, rue and courage together. But I thought you might come for him. The first stars were prickling in the bruised sky. The truck had cooled, the world had not. Bale could feel the fork in this road, could feel every year he had carried this grief like a secret blade. He looked at Luther, at the man who had put a letter in the glove box and a hand on the wheel and the map between them like an honest dare. Do you want to open it? Luther asked. Not yet, Bale said. I want to wait until we're closer. Then, we go, Luther said simply, and reached past Bale to click the glove box shut. His shoulder brushed Bale's chest, a brief warmth, a human gravity. The contact sparked its own map, one that had nothing to do with asphalt. The engine coughed, caught, compromised. Somewhere in the dusk, a motorbike droned, growing louder, a wisp of sound drawing a line through the quiet. Luther glanced at the uplifting. Rear view. The mirror framed a bike with two silhouettes, no lights, coming fast. Do you know them? Bale asked. No, Luther said. His hands settled back on the wheel, steady despite the dark. But they might know us. And the road, as if suddenly awake, leaned forward to meet them. Heat, dust, and the motorbike bearing down. Bale's past sealed in an envelope, their future clutched in the driver's hands. Luther's pulse hammered through the seat. Somewhere between Accra and a town called Keet, they would decide, keep, running or stop and open the thing that might finally break them both. Hold on, Luther said, and the word came like a chord struck low, vibrating in Bale's bones. The motorbike's buzz became a snarl, its silhouette briefly mirrored in the side mirror. Two riders, black helmets, no plates. The road unspooled, straight and treacherous. Luther eased to the shoulder as if to yield. Then, with a flick of the wrist and a prayer in Bale didn't catch, he punched the accelerator and cut across a dirt track veering left, the Land Cruiser bucking like something alive. Red dust roared up the windows. The glove box rattled, the cassette skittered back inside its plastic burrow, and the envelope slid across Bale's thigh. He caught it, pressed it flat to his chest, felt his heart drum beneath it as if the paper had grown a second pulse. The track narrowed into a corridor of elephant grass. Stalks slapped the doors. The motorbike dove after them, fishtailing, closer, closer. Can we outrun them? Bale asked, voice thin. We can outthink them, Luther said, and then the path dropped and flared into a clearing around a lone silk cotton tree, its roots like the knuckles of an old god. Luther threw the wheel right, circled the trunk, and cut the engine. Dust collapsed over them in a dull, choking wave. He held up a hand. Wait. The bike shot past the mouth of the clearing, momentum carrying it like a thrown knife. The riders were shadows with elbows. They didn't look left. They didn't look at the quiet truck tucked in the tree's shadow, two men inside learning how not to breathe. The bike's sound frayed and fell away. Luther exhaled first. He turned, found, Bale clutching the envelope as if it were a talisman. You all right? He asked. Bale nodded, then nodded again, a man performing certainty because it mattered that someone did. Who are they? He managed. Anyone, Luther said. No one. Boys who want a story to tell later, or men who think a foreigner means money, or... He stopped. Or what? Or maybe they followed us from the checkpoint, because sometimes news travels faster than a truck. The urge to laugh bubbled up, absurd and alive. Bale's mouth twisted. Is this part of the package? Scenic detours, surprise adrenaline. Luther's smile was quick and real. He reached without thinking and set his hand on Bale's knee, warm palm, steadying weight. I'll get you there, he said. I promised myself that. Bale didn't move his leg away. He put the envelope on the dash, above the glove box that had betrayed it. Outside, the insects began their evening. Violins, the world, rude and ordinary, resumed. They idled until the dust settled like a blessing, then worked back to the main road in a looping arc. The sky bruised itself toward night. Bale thought of how many times in his life he had mistaken danger for a test, and tests for intimacy. He rested his hands together, fingers laced. Luther drove with his jaw tight, that small scar lit briefly whenever they passed the ghost of a streetlight. By the time the river announced itself, it did so with smell before sight, a coolness on the air, an algae tang whispering through the heat. The road sloped down to Dambai, where the ferry clanked and complained and sailors shouted names that were more like hopes. Krachi, Krachi, last ferry, hurry, while goats argued about everything and women balanced trays of boiled eggs with pepper and sachets of water poised like tiny miracles. Can we make it? Bale asked. Luther checked the line, assessed the tangle of trucks, taxis, a bus with its destination painted in fading letters. We can if we try, he said, and he did something Bale hadn't expected. He laughed, leaned out the window, and called in twi to a man in a reflective vest. Whatever he said contained humor and pleading and just enough respect. The man shrugged, then lifted his hand. Come. They squeezed onto the ferry, steel under tires, river lapping at the edges, the deck creaking like an old spine. The motorbike appeared at the top of the slope as the ramp lifted, too late. One rider lifted a hand, either a wave or a promise. Luther watched them without expression as the ferry pulled away. The river widened like a throat swallowing the day. On the far bank, the world shrank to a line of trees and the idea of a road. Bale stepped out of the cab, needing the air. The envelope had a weight he could name now. It weighed exactly as much as words do when they've waited too long. It's time, he said, and he felt it in his ankles, in his chest. Luther came to stand beside him, leaving enough space that the space felt like a decision. The ferry's engines throbbed. A boy threaded through the cars selling groundnuts in paper twists. Luther bought some and handed half to Bale. The nuts were warm and stubborn against his tongue. Bale drew a breath, so deep it felt like the opposite of drowning. He broke the seal. The paper lifted like a wing. The handwriting was smaller than he remembered, careful as stitching. He read, and the river listened. Bale, I write because you said letters are boats, and the river here is always hungry. If this finds you, then the world is kinder than we believed when we were young and thinking our bodies could carry every kind of hope. I wanted to be angry at you for leaving, and then I wanted to be holy for forgiving you. I was neither. I was a man who made a life, and in that life I kept a drawer for our summer. Do you remember the fig tree by my mother's wall? You told me the English word for the way light looks when it goes through leaves, dappled, and I laughed at your serious face and kissed it anyway. We were so brave with each other and so afraid with everyone else. I do not ask you to come back. I ask you to know I lived, truly, and that when I went into the water that afternoon, the river took my name with gentleness. If you can, bring me home. Not because you owe me, but because you know how to carry something that other people call a burden and you call love. I still hum that song you taught me when the power goes, 1 da, 2 da, 3 da. If you sing it on the road, I will hear you. Kofi. The words ended cleanly. Bale stood with the paper trembling like a leaf caught between two seasons. He didn't realize he was crying until one of the tears hit the page and bloomed. A small, dark flower. Luther said nothing. He took the handkerchief from his pocket and held it out. Bale took it, wiped his face, and then, without permission but without apology, he reached for Luther's hand. Their fingers met, the contact a bright, honest thing. Luther's hand closed. Thank you, Bale said, voice ash-soft. For finding it. For braving everything to put it in my hands. Luther's eyes were on the water. I kept a drawer for my own summers, he said quietly. It stayed empty for a long time. Bale turned. Is it still? Luther gave a small smile. Maybe not. The ferry bell clanged, a sound that said we're halfway, and also we're almost there. Shadows gathered under the trucks like secret meetings. A woman began to pray in you, her voice a thread stitching the edges of dusk. Luther leaned on the rail. Bale stood close enough to feel the heat of him. Bale, Luther said, and then stopped, as if the name itself were enough. When I said, I wanted to see if you still wanted to go, I do, Bale said, to Keat, and, he swallowed, and to whatever part of this road has you on it. Luther's fingers flexed in his. A beat passed. He turned his palm, laced their hands fully, then let go, because sometimes not holding is a way of promising you will again. They rolled off the ferry into Catekrachi under a sky that had gone from violet to ink. The air smelled like wood smoke and fish pulled from the lake an hour ago. The guest house Luther chose was painted a dreaming blue, its courtyard strung with a line of plastic flags that had lost their letters. The proprietor took one look at Bale's face, at the grief most men learn to hide, and gave him a room with a fan that worked and a window that opened onto the whisper of night water. Dinner was fufu and groundnut soup. Bale ate until the world steadied under him. Luther wiped his bowl with bread and then, almost shyly, asked the proprietor if he had a guitar. He did. It was missing a string, its belly scarred, but Luther nestled it like a sleeping creature and coaxed a melody from its tired body. He played the simple song Kofi had written about power cuts and candles and the relief of a breeze. Bale laughed through the last of his tears. "Your voice," he said. "It's like the road. It makes a promise and keeps it." Luther looked at him across the small courtyard table, the music fading to a hum in the night. "And you," he said, "arrived with a tin and a letter and managed to make the whole sky listen." They were the last to go upstairs. In the corridor, a lizard froze, its golden throat flickering. In the room, the fan rattled. 2 beds stood with the exaggerated politeness of strangers. "I can take the floor," Luther said. "Absolutely not," Bale said, fiercer than he meant to sound, then softened it with a tilt of his mouth. "I've made you drive and dodge and sing. You get a mattress." Luther's hand found the doorframe. For a ridiculous moment, Bale wanted to kiss that part of him, the part that held. He crossed the room instead, set the letter on the table beside the tin. The fan pushed the edges of the paper, as if it wanted to make the words breathe again. Luther switched off the light, then on again, as though giving the dark and the light a chance to greet each other. "I'll keep watch," he said, "just in case our friends on the motorbike come looking for their story." "Come sit," Bale said, patting the bed. 2 guards are better than 1. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the edge of the mattress, the quiet between them not empty, but charged, like a sky right before rain decides. Bale turned his head. Luther did, too, and where their gazes met, something went forward without permission. It wasn't a long kiss or a deep one. It was a light laid carefully on top of a bruise so the pain would remember it wasn't the only thing there. When they pulled back, Luther's smile was the quietest thing Bale had ever wanted. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we finish the journey." The knock came just before midnight. 3 beats, measured, not tentative. Luther's body was vertical before the sound finished. Bale stood too, blood learning a new drum. The fan ticked. On the other side of the door, a man's voice said, low and soft, "Driver, open. We need to talk." The midnight knock hung, like a knife. Behind the door, a voice called "Driver." Inside, a tin carried a man's last wish, and a letter had reopened an old heart. Open and risk it all. Don't. And the past wins again. At dawn, love demanded an answer. From 2 men. Luther moved first. He put a finger to his lips, crossed to the door, and leaned his weight into the wood as if he could listen with his whole body. Bale stood at his shoulder, the envelope still on the table between the tin and the borrowed guitar, the fan beating ragged time. "Who is it?" Luther asked. "Driver," the voice said again, low. "It's Mensa, from Keat. Please." Luther slid the bolt back halfway, let the door open on the chain. A young man stood in the corridor, chin lifted, eyes bright and too tired to be 25. Behind him, 2 figures waited, helmeted, carrying their helmets by the straps now, not like a threat, but like an apology. The nearest one had dust ridge lines on his cheek, the kind that only form on a face that has been staring into wind. "I'm Mensa," the young man said, keeping his hands where Luther could see them. "Kofi was my cousin, the owner downstairs. Told me you were here. Our mother hasn't slept since word came from Accra. We thought..." He flicked his eyes toward the 2 motorbike riders. "We thought you might need watching. Forgive us. We frightened you on the road." Bale felt his lungs drop and rise again, a tide changing its mind. The riders, boys really, shifted, ashamed. One of them lifted his chin. "We tried to catch you at the ferry," he said. "But you were gone." Luther took the chain off the door. The room suddenly felt both smaller and safer with these strangers inside the threshold, their intentions set down like burdens. "You," Could have called out, he said, not unkindly. We were foolish, Mensa said. And fast. He glanced past Luther and his gaze snagged on the tin, then on the letter. He swallowed. Can you come at daybreak? It is better for the older women's hearts. And the town. The town is kinder in the morning. Bale stepped forward. My name is Bale, he said, feeling the syllable lodge and then loosen from his own shame. Thank you for following us. Thank you for admitting you did. Mensa nodded. Kofi talked about you like the Harmattan talks about dust, he said softly. I was a boy. I thought you were a story men told when they wanted to sound sad and brave at the same time. Then your name arrived in the mouth of a man from the city, and I realized stories can keep walking after their first ending. The words landed in Bale's chest like gentle stones. Luther shifted, taking in the riders again, then the young man whose shoulders held up this midnight. We'll come at dawn, Luther said. We'll do what needs doing. Mensa's relief was quick and quiet. We'll wait for you at the corner, he said. We don't want the whole guest house awake with us. When the corridor fell, empty again, Luther closed the door and leaned against it. For a moment, the room listened to their breath. Bale crossed to him, cupped his forearm in both hands, feeling the heat there, the steadiness. Not thieves, Bale said on the edge of a laugh that wasn't unkind. Not thieves, Luther agreed. Just men who didn't know how to say we care. Bale looked at the two beds with their diplomatic space. His body ached with the day, with the decades that had preceded it. Lie down, he said. We'll take turns failing to sleep. They did, fully clothed, boots off. In the thin light, the letter rustled as if remembering itself. Bale closed his eyes and counted the fan's ticks. 1 da, 2 da, 3 da. The rhythm Kofi had written into a song for evenings like this. Power out, heart lit. Somewhere between 2 and 3, a hand found his, Luther's hand, and rested there as if it had always known the way. Dawn came quietly, with roosters who took their work seriously and a gray that softened the world's edges. They stepped into it together, the letter tucked into Bale's shirt pocket, the tin held against his ribs as if it could hear his heart. Mensa and the riders waited where the dusty lane met the road, their bikes idling like impatient goats. Come, Mensa said, before the market wakes. Keat rose from the earth like a memory, low houses the color of their own dust, a schoolyard with a metal goal that had lost one post, a shop window hand-painted with the word glory. The house with the blue door was smaller than Bale's mind had kept it, and the fig tree was larger, its leaves murmuring the word he had taught Kofi, dappled. Shadows lay on the wall in coin-shaped light. Mama stood in the doorway, straight-backed, her head tie precise. Her face was everything at once, suspicion, welcome, grief so old it had become a bone in her, humor like a flame that refused the wind. When she saw Bale, the suspicion dissolved first, then the humor sparked, then the grief opened its eyes. Ah, she said. You are the one who went away, and now you have come. Bale bowed his head until his chin touched his chest. Mama, he said, I am sorry for all the years. I am grateful for this one. He held out the tin. She took it, not as if it were heavy, but as if it were alive. He was Friday born, she said, almost to herself. He was always trying to turn endings into beginnings. He would be laughing now that you came like a late rain. She looked up at Bale. Are you hungry? Yes, Bale said, and the boy in him answered. And I am afraid. You can be both, she said, and her mouth made a small, fierce line that he recognized, the same mouth in the photographs he had kept in a book on a shelf, the same mouth he had kissed when the world was a smaller country. They went to the fig tree. The neighbors came, not many, just enough to make the grief a thing that could be held by more than 2 hands. Mensa dug a shallow place among the roots. The earth smelled like first rain, like green secrets. Luther stood a step away, his presence a kind of shelter. Mama? Bale said, his voice unraveling and then reweaving itself. He wrote me a letter. He lifted it from his pocket with careful fingers, the paper soft now where tears had found it. He read aloud. When he said the words I kept a drawer for our summer, Mama closed her eyes. When he said if you sing it on the road, I will hear you, someone, he didn't know who, began to hum under their breath. And then the humming found a rhythm, 1 da, 2 da, 3 da, and Luther's voice joined low and sure, turning a hum into a song. Bale opened the tin. Ashes don't look like a person, he thought, and then, except when they do. He tipped them into the earth with hands that did not shake because they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Mama poured a little water over them, libation made ordinary. Mensa broke a cola nut and laid it on the soil. Luther reached into his pocket and brought out the knotted rosary that had tumbled from the glove box in that moment of goat and panic. He looked at Bale. May I? He asked. Bale nodded. Luther set the rosary in the earth like a promise kept quiet, beads to be counted, breaths to be taken. Mama placed her palm on the damp soil. When my son learned words, he learned them in 2 tongues, she said in you, then in English. He learned love the same way. We cannot be angry at a river for being a river. We can only be a bank that does not break. Thank you for bringing him home. Bale's knees wanted to give, not from weakness, but from reverence. He let them, sinking to a crouch, his hand beside Mama's on the earth. The space between their fingers filled with the fine dust of a man's life and a summer's promise and the strange mercy of survival. He bowed his head until his forehead brushed the soil, and in that posture something loosened that he had held tight for 33 years. When the last handful of red earth covered the place where ash met root, the sun had climbed enough to make a pattern on Mama's wall like a map only birds could read. The small crowd shifted back into their day. Someone brought bowls of cocoa and bread. Someone else pressed sachets of water into Luther's and Bale's hands with the simple authority of hospitality. Mensa sat cross-legged at Bale's feet. He would be pleased, he said. He told me once that if good men grew into trees, he would want to be shade. Bale smiled through the dampness still on his face. He is, he said. The blue door stayed open. Inside, the house smelled of pepper and soap. On a shelf, a single photograph stood, the one Bale had given Kofi long ago, 2 young men pretending they weren't about to leave and be left. Mama tapped the frame. I kept this turned to the wall when I was angry, she said. Then I realized I was making myself blind. I turned it back. Outside, the boys with the motorbike hovered, chastened and proud, their helmets tucked like footballs under their arms. Luther went to them and shook each hand. You kept watch, he said. You did the right thing the wrong way. Next time, shout. They laughed, grinned, promised they would. One of them beckoned Luther over to the bike, showed him how to adjust a choke that had been sticking. Luther leaned in, knowing, his hands happy with the familiar puzzle of machines. Bale found himself beside Mama on the stoop. They watched the small morning unfold, goats parsing what belonged to them, women setting bowls on heads with a practiced sway, a radio refusing to be drowned by distance. I am 60, Bale said, not looking at her. That feels like a misprint, but it's true. Mama made a small sound, neither surprise nor judgment. Then you know something about staying and something about going, she said. Do you know what you will do now? He thought of planes and rooms and the way loneliness can look like freedom and freedom like loneliness. He thought of Luther's hand finding his in a room with a rattling fan. He thought of the glove box clicking shut with the confidence of a thing that had given up its secrets. I think I will stop letting fear do the choosing, he said. I think I will see where the road ends if I do not turn away first. Mama smiled without showing teeth. Good, she said. Roads. Get tired of men who flirt with them and then marry something else. Luther returned, dust on his cheek and a light that wasn't only the sun in his eyes. He stood before Bale as if asking permission and asking none. Ready? He asked. For the part of the journey that isn't measured in kilometers, Bale said. Yes. They said their goodbyes, which weren't goodbyes so much as the planting of another kind of root. Mama took Bale's head in her hands, her palms warm and sure. "When you are old, she said, be careful not to think all the food has been eaten. There is always one more bowl." Outside the town, they stopped by the lake where the water kept its secrets with the patience of an archivist. Luther killed the engine. The hush was full. Bale took Luther's hand without looking first to see if anyone watched, not because he was careless now, but because he had chosen something, and the choosing had taught him whose eyes mattered. During the journey, Bale said, "We did this." "What?" Luther asked, his thumb tracing the back of Bale's hand. "We told the truth," Bale said. "We opened the thing that could break us. We outran what wanted to make us small. We carried love where it asked to go." Luther's mouth lifted at one corner. "And we kissed once in a room with a bad fan," he said. "There is that." Bale turned, closed the little distance between courage and action, and kissed him again. Still not a long kiss, not a deep one, but no longer. A question. The horizon did what horizons do. It waited, generous. On the ride back, the glove box stayed closed, not with threat, but with ease. The cassette rattled a little, a companionable ghost. Luther tapped 2 fingers against the wheel. 1 da, 2 da, 3 da, and Bale answered on his thigh. The road didn't chase them anymore. It traveled alongside, a good friend who had decided to stay. Somewhere past the place where the silk cotton tree kept its circle of shade, Bale rolled the window down and let the heat press against him without argument. He leaned his head back. "Watch the sky make its slow blue promises." "Volta first?" Luther asked. "To see where I learned 3 chords and then found the rest?" "Yes," Bale said. "Let's go there, and then let's keep going until we run out of reasons to stop." Luther smiled, that careful smile he wore rarely and now gave freely. "I'll get you there," he said again, but it meant something. Wider. Not a town this time, but a life. The land cruiser hummed its unlovely hymn. The dust rose and settled. Ahead, the road was a long brown ribbon that did not mind being walked twice, 3 times, as long as the feet upon it were honest. And behind them, under a fig tree's dappled shade, a boy who had been a man who had been a river rested finally at home.